Chapter 11. Because I Need Your Love So Bad. Remus woke up the following day well rested and hard as a rock. Sue him. He was warm and happy, his dick pressed against Sirius's ass, and Sirius was being such a good little spoon. Remus could feel his breaths on his arm wrapped around him, little puffs of air as he slept soundly, and he was comfortable. His back pressed against Remus's chest, he fit curved against him like Sirius was made to be there and only there. Never to be moved, never to leave that bed, because at that moment he was there, and shifting or moving or daring to breathe any harder than he had been while asleep was a risk Remus could not, logically, bear to take. So he stayed there, studying each individual hair on Sirius's head and how it smelled like a mixture of Lily's shampoo, sweat, and that smell that was just Sirius. Indiscernible, never to be replicated, because it was a mixture of wit, charm, and loveliness that was intoxicating, and soon Remus's nose was pressed into the top of Sirius's head. He smushed his fucking nose into his hair and inhaled because it made his head dizzy, like he was getting his Sirius fill for the day. Felt high as a fucking kite on nothing but the worst feelings of love. Remus's mind floated to thoughts of days spent in bed, just like this, and then, what if it was their bed? What if it was a lifetime where they had a bed? What color sheets would it have? Black seemed like a bad choice. Remus chuckled to himself. Maybe green? Maybe red or something striped even. Would they have a matching side tables? What would even be on Sirius's? At the end of the day, there'd probably be a pile of rings. On the days he remembered to take them off. And maybe a book on the off chance he read, although Sirius had never really been a reader. Remus would maybe have a few books and a picture of them on his side table. Framed and everything, which was a huge undertaking, buying a frame and everything. But it would sit next to them, holding a moment from a time before, where, if the picture of them could move, talk even, they'd watch them sleep every night and think, wow, how did we get there? Sirius mumbled in his sleep, his head leaning forward as his cheek pressed into the top of Remus's hand before he shifted, turning away. He immediately mourned the contact until Sirius rolled back, turning over, and curled into Remus's chest. He stretched his neck up, fucking snuggling into the warmth under Remus's chin, and promptly fell back asleep, breathing evening out once more. They stayed like that for however long they stayed like that. Remus didn't count, just laid there and soaked it all up, until Sirius began to stir and tried to get comfortable again. He was less hot than yesterday, and Remus opened his eyes as Sirius began kicking his leg, trying to get it out from under the blanket. He still seemed asleep, so Remus reached down, lifting the blankets to allow Sirius to get his leg out, which was immediately draped over Remus's hip. I know you're awake. Sirius spoke after a few minutes, his voice heavy with sleep, but with no less conviction. Remus nodded softly. And you're awake now. I've been awake. You have not. Promise. Keeping tabs on me, Moons? Always. That garnered a huff from Sirius, and his warm breath immediately sunk into Remus's chest, and he smiled. Sirius slowly rubbed his cheek against Remus's neck, groaning as he did so, and Remus was suddenly aware that, yeah, he was still hard, and it hadn't been an issue until now. Maybe it had been an issue before, but not a pertinent one. Don't move, Remus mumbled as Sirius went to. He didn't really know. Roll them over? Either way, Sirius was trying to push Remus back, his hard head digging in under his chin and throwing his weight towards Remus, and he resisted, using all his strength to stay where he was. It's hot, Sirius moaned, and Remus took a deep breath. Stop talking. Excuse you, please. Sirius groaned again, bringing a hand up to push Remus's hip back so he could roll them over, and Remus grabbed his wrist, stilling it before he could plant it anywhere near his dick. Why are you being so weird? Sirius said, and Remus didn't really want to explain what was weird about the situation because, depending on how you looked at it, a lot was weird, and off, and just plain strange. Not being weird. You are. You're no fun to wake up next to. Just move your leg. Why? Just roll over. Well, I'm trying to do that, but you... Sirius paused and stopped talking before Remus felt his shoulders shake as he smiled. Fucking giggled. You're hard. Stop talking. Sirius sat up then, moving his leg off Remus finally, and he sighed in relief. What? I can't even talk? No. Oh, Moony, Sirius hummed, tossing his head to the side. Moony, Moony, Moony. He tilted his head down, looking at Remus over his lashes, and Remus, hand to God, gulped, like it was some cartoon, and he was surprised it wasn't audible. Remus gulped, and Sirius raised a brow, parting his lips, and then drove it all home. Remus? It was said on the breath of a moan, something entirely too attractive this early in the morning, with his hair sticking up in every direction and needing a good brushing. Still, he was also serious, and his skin was flush, and he had a healthy-looking pink to his cheeks. His nose was a little less red, and his eyes looked much better. But his skin was as pale as ever, porcelain almost, and he was serious with all the tattoos. He was smiling at him after he had said Remus's name, like Sirius knew what he had just done, and Remus shot him the nastiest look he could muster while feeling like he was about to cum in his pants like a fucking teenager. Love was humiliating. Remus went and showered immediately, which was actually just jerking off immediately. And yes, thank you for asking. He did feel a bit weird rubbing one out in his friend's shower. Still, desperate times call for desperate measures. And he was so desperate that it took maybe a minute and a half. It was pathetic, but also the best. It was sick. Literally and figuratively. Afterwards, he felt better, but not like his mind was cleared, which was a lot to unpack. But he decided to keep that shit tucked away for the day because Remus was quite happy that morning, if you were being honest. Sirius was waiting for him after a very stern, "If I'm staying in bed all day, you're staying with me." And who was Remus to deny? He lived to please. So he got out and threw on one of Sirius's shirts that was on top of the dryer, and his pair of shorts because it was nice out. Still rainy, and by the time he showered, Lily and James had opened the windows again, but it was nice nonetheless. Sirius was sitting up in bed, arms crossed, and Remus didn't like the look on his face. Not one bit. Good shower? Yeah. How good? Sirius shot back, biting his tongue, trying not to laugh. Remus only grinned, full of teeth and as saccharine as he could muster. The best. James and Lily left for the day, which Remus only half believed was because they had very ambiguous errands. Moore thought that they were trying to give Remus and Sirius time, which he appreciated, but also slightly terrified him. Because once they were gone, Sirius and Remus were in bed in an apartment, and even though it was not theirs, it was a bit like playing house, which was so fucking dangerous and went to Remus's head almost immediately. "How are you feeling?" Remus asked as he lay in bed, facing the headboard, and looked at Sirius leaning against it with his eyes closed. "Better. Still a bit bad, but better," he said. "I feel like I was dying." "It wasn't that bad," Remus laughed, lying back, his head off the bed, trying to fish for a joint in his bag. He finally found it, grabbing the lighter on the nightstand and sitting up. "You don't know." Sirius opened an eye, narrowing it at him. He let out a pitiful whine. "Don't smoke." "Why?" "Because I know you won't let me smoke." "Correct." "But I want to." "Tough shit." "Moony," Sirius complained again, throwing his head back against the wall. "Please, it'll make me feel better." "It won't, and you'll feel bad at the show tomorrow." Sirius stuck his tongue out at Remus then, began to actually pout, and had it been anyone else out of the 4 billion people in the world, Remus would have been put off. Grimaced and rolled his eyes, and he did grimace and roll his eyes, but it was out of fondness and love. "But we're stuck inside all day, and I'd rather do that high than—" Sirius stopped, pausing, and Remus did as well, because he could see the wheels turning in Sirius's mind. "Come here." Remus drew back, wary at the glint in Sirius's eye. "Why?" "Shotgun me." Yep, that was what Remus had feared. Truly feared, which made no sense because his tongue had been down Sirius's throat at one point in the not-too-distant past, and surely that was more severe, more something than shotgunning, but at the same time, fuck. I don't know if that's a good idea, he finally offered up, lighting the joint and inhaling. Sirius raised a brow. It's the same thing. I'm not smoking it then. But you don't have to kiss me, Mooney. Sirius raised a brow and sat up, the blankets dropping around his waist. And there was that Mooney tattoo, and Remus only sighed. Sighed like he always did. He sighed so much, didn't he? And nodded. Fine, but don't tell James and Lily. Cross my heart, Sirius said, making the motion, and then began to crawl over to Remus, who took another hit, a large one, mind you, and froze as Sirius just climbed onto his lap. You didn't have to do all that, he mumbled as he stuck the joint between his lips again. Unnecessary. Come on, Sirius settled his legs on either side of Remus's thighs. Now, he had never shotgunned before. Remus knew the general concept. It wasn't hard, pun intended, but this was different. Remus was nervous, which made no sense because, actually, he was married to the man sitting on top of him, asking him to blow smoke into his mouth. Married to the man, kissed him a handful of times now, had touched his dick kind of the night before, for God's sake, but this was different. The sun was out and privy to the poor decision that was about to be made. There was nothing to disguise it as anything other than what it was. It was not dark. Remus could see Sirius bright as day in front of him, and it was all threatening. So Remus dug down, mustered up some sort of courage or whatever the fuck he needed, and breathed in a lungful of smoke. He swallowed and blew it in Sirius's face, who only rolled his eyes before Remus straightened up again, bringing a hand around to rest on Sirius's back to keep him in place. Sirius leaned his forehead against his, and Remus took another long drag, holding the joint out to the side before removing his hand from Sirius's back, gripping his chin firmly, and pressing their lips together. Remus won't lie. It was a kiss. There was a little extra in there that was unnecessary for shotgunning, but he was only human and couldn't help himself. Sirius tilted his head to the side, his nose resting next to Remus's, before he exhaled and Sirius breathed in. Long and deep, Remus stilled his head as he did so, fingers firm on his jaw. Sirius held the smoke in his lungs before breathing out again, and Remus breathed that in again. And he was sure that, had there been any smoke left, Sirius would have taken it back one more time. Again, Sirius whispered, clearing his throat. And Remus obliged, even though the clearing of his throat should have let him know that this was a bad idea, and Sirius was still sick, but he would be strong. Keep it clinical. He took another drag, 2 short ones, then a long one, and felt Sirius smile against his mouth as he brought their lips together, leaning against Remus's shoulder. Remus pushed his thumb up, pulling down Sirius's chin to open his mouth, and he felt Sirius's tongue slip across the tip of his finger before he inhaled the smoke Remus let out on a shaky exhale. Sirius held it in his throat for so long that nothing came out, but Remus spent the few moments with his mouth pressed against his, still, not daring to move, but he knew had he darted his tongue out, Remus would have gotten a taste of Sirius's fucking teeth, and they probably would taste like fucking mint toothpaste because the smoke he had been giving back to Remus was riddled with the taste from brushing their teeth that morning. The loveliest fucking teeth. One more? Sirius pressed his head further against Remus's, and he nodded. Of course. As many times as you want. He repeated what he had done last time, except this time, as Sirius pressed his open lips to his, he darted his tongue out and ran it across Sirius's fucking teeth, taking in the sharp edges of Sirius's bottom teeth, and then his canines. He could feel Sirius exhale the smoke between them a moment before his hand came to the back of Remus's head and pressed their lips together. It wasn't so much a kiss as it was their open mouths panting into each other, both high now, and languid movements of the tongue, as it seemed Sirius was determined to run his along the inside of Remus's mouth and his teeth just to get any extra smoke he may have missed. But it was all gone, dispersed around the air between them, and it was just Remus. It was all Remus, and Sirius gripped his hair tighter, licking the roof of his mouth before running his tongue along his bottom lip and pulling away, roughly letting go of his hair. "What about this one?" Remus asked, trailing his fingers along Sirius's back over the "pretty vacant" tattoo. "Sex Pistols," he mumbled in response from where he was lying face down on the bed, stretched out like a cat, half asleep and high as all hell. It seemed a tolerance break had been needed, and now all Sirius was capable of was lying down, which was fine by Remus, and had he known smoking would have cured his twitchiness from being sick and stuck inside, he would have helped out a few days ago, happily. "This one?" Remus asked, running his fingers down Sirius's spine, over the phases of the moon there. He knew the answer, of course, but wanted to hear him say it. "You." Sirius looked up at him again and let out a huff. Arched over further, his brows were drawn together like he was thinking about something real hard. "What?" Remus leaned into it, shifting the bed, and Sirius cursed, narrowing his eyes. I would rather go blind, boy. Nothing at all. Sirius only shrugged, then froze his fingers, shaking his head. "You're always looking at me." "And to see you walk away from me, child." He was sitting with his knees drawn up on the bed, carefully balancing a thing of nail polish on his knee that Remus was sure was about to tip over. He had done his left hand, licking his finger and trying to fix his thumb a few times. Remus had watched him paint his nails 1,000,000 times, but Remus was doing a horrible job right then. "We've been over this," Remus mumbled, lying with his legs hanging off the bed, arms behind his head. "I can't look at you?" "You don't have to, no." Remus grinned, turning to prop himself up on his elbow. "I'm going to talk to you without looking at you?" "You're gonna spill this," Sirius laughed, shoving the bottle of nail polish into the fold on the comforter, safe and secure. Sirius moved suddenly, sitting cross-legged, and was silent, holding his hand out in front of him, admiring his work before meeting Remus's eye. "Will you help me with the other hand?" "You see, I love you so much that I don't want to watch you leave, baby." "Of course." Remus held his hand out for the little bottle. A moment of silence. "Can I paint yours?" "Oh, so I just don't want to be free, no." Sirius was sitting on the ground, the little black nail polish bottle on the coffee table. It was just past the time in the morning when the Saturday morning cartoons turned off, and he instead was painting his nails, the record spinning static neither of them had bothered to get up and change. The windows were open. It was raining slightly, and they had the house to themselves. It was Thanksgiving break, and it had been 2 weeks since Remus saw his parents. "Will you read me something?" Sirius asked without looking up from where he was leaning over his hand, tongue just poking out the corner of his mouth as he concentrated. Remus glanced over lazily, high and content not to move, but Sirius got what he wanted, and he was in love. Acutely aware of it that day, for whatever reason. The air felt just a bit hazier than it usually did, something drawing all the nasty and sweet bits to the surface quicker. Sirius looked as he always did, the perfect picture of it all. "What do you want to hear?" He looked up at Remus and did a double take before painting his thumb, muttering, "Something sweet?" Remus reached back, fumbling on the little table next to the couch, knocking over what he thought was a tissue box or maybe the remotes before feeling the soft pages of a book. He often kept them around the house, read aloud to fill the silence when Sirius could not. "What book?" Sirius asked. Remus flipped to where he had been last reading. "The Princess Bride." "Heard of that one." Remus only hummed before clearing his throat, stealing one more glance at Sirius. His eyes focused on the page, and he nearly scoffed at the audacity of his former self for, first off, stopping in the middle of a chapter, and, second, stopping where he had. Sirius wanted to hear something sweet, and Remus hoped he choked on it. "I love you so much more now than 20 minutes ago that there cannot be comparison. Remus cleared his throat. Fuck. I love you so much more now than when you opened your hovel door. There cannot be comparison. He looked at Sirius, seeing his brows drawn as he aggressively tried to pick off some of the nail polish that had gotten on his skin. He froze when Remus didn't continue and glanced up. And it was a small moment. A brief glance backtracked by TV static and the fading out of the words Remus had just spoken. A single second in time, in a life of millions, and Remus knew he would never forget the look in Sirius's eye. Sharp eyes, a bit of a narrow to them, like Remus was sitting in the light too perfect, and it was highlighting and allowing Sirius to see something for the first time. Sharp but careless. He was ignorant of what he had just bound Remus to, forever remembering what Sirius looked like in his life at that second. To love someone is to accept defeat, and Remus was such a massive failure. He cleared his throat again, sitting up a bit. There is no room in my body for anything but you. My arms love you. My ears adore you. My knees shake with blind affection. One more stolen glance. My mind begs you to ask it something so it can obey. Sirius jerked Remus's hand in front of his face, causing him to fall over, landing on his chest. Remus propped himself up, glancing down at Sirius as he brought his hand closer. You're feeling better? He mumbled. Much, Sirius nodded. What happened here? Fight. Remus tilted his head, glancing at where Sirius was ghosting his finger over the scar on the top of his hand. It was faded a light pink and turned a bit purple when he was cold. Yeah, but I want to hear the story. Remus huffed. Well, I believe that one was an unfortunate run-in with a bottle. Went to grab it from whoever was holding it, and it got me. You don't know who it was? No idea. And Remus didn't have any idea at all. He had been too drunk that night to remember walking home, let alone whose face had been in front of him as he had gotten fucked up. It had taken him half a day to even notice the cut, having passed out on the couch in the early morning. Sirius was quiet for another moment before speaking. Moons? Yeah. Will you tell me? Sirius reached up, tracing his finger along Remus's eyebrow, smoothing it down. What happened here? And Remus sighed. His chest felt heavy because he didn't want to tell him. There was no easy way to tell Sirius, and he felt it would destroy the carefully balanced thing between them, tip everything over, and they hadn't had a conversation yet, but he didn't know if it would be better to bring it up during the conversation, or now, or after, or never. Maybe he should lie, but Remus wouldn't. Not to Sirius, who was looking at him with eager eyes like he had wanted to ask so many times, and hadn't, but just couldn't help himself this time. Please? And it was the please that did it. Don't ask him why, but Sirius cocked his head, his fingers tracing where the scar cut across his face, and Remus hated it. Loved the tilt of his head, but loathed it at the same time. That was... Remus grimaced, pressing his face into the crook of Sirius's neck, letting his elbow drop, just fucking hid and tried to sink into him. Your dad, actually. And it was deathly silent as the words hung between them, above them, in the air. You could hear a pin drop, and they did hear a neighbor unlock their door. You could hear the wind outside and the rush of cars through the open windows, the light drizzle of rain. Remus felt his breath on his own face, Sirius's skin pressed against his nose, and it was a deciding moment. Time went by, and he didn't dare move on the off chance that might be the reason the heavens fall. Sirius finally spoke. When? And his voice was like fucking ice. Not a hint of emotion in it. Cold and callous. He was still as a board under him, and Remus would admit he was still afraid to move his head, to lift and look at Sirius. The night you left, he mumbled into his skin. After you had left. What happened? And Remus knew there was no backing out. There was no roundabout way of saying it, and honestly, he wasn't so upset at the scar or having to tell the story of what happened to him. More the fact that he knew Sirius and knew he had a split second and about one chance to explain it in a way that didn't lie heavy on him. He prayed to God Sirius would understand. Remus did not care about the scar. He'd do it again in a heartbeat. I went over to your house after you left. Just wanted to stand in the driveway for a bit. Remus shook his head, remembering. The light at the end of their driveway was on, and Remus stood under it for a long while, swaying a bit with the wind that was picking up. It smelled like it was going to rain, and he sighed. Took a step over the first crack in the pavement, and walked up to the garage door. I was a bit drunk, maybe, I don't know, and was standing there, and your dad came out of the house. Sirius was silent, but nodded, his hand coming up, and Remus felt a tug on a piece of his hair. Sirius playing with it. And he saw me, and then suddenly he was there in front of me, asking what I was doing there, and I thought all of you had left. Orion wasn't an inherently intimidating person. It was all in his sneer, the turn of his lips, always frowning as if he had never known a moment of peace. Remus stood in the dark, and the garage door was fucking loud as it closed behind him. He finally turned and caught Remus's eye. There wasn't a flinch or a sound made. Sirius's father only stared back at him. What are you doing here? Remus hated the man. I thought y'all left. And then he started saying some shit. Yeah, Sirius said, voice low. Somebody said something they shouldn't have. Yeah. So he started saying all that, and I got really... What did he say? What? Remus asked, trying to buy time, but there was no use. Sirius huffed. What did he say, Moons? A silent moment of defense, gathering it up in case it all fell apart as Remus spoke again. You're both fucking sick. This is all your fault. I'd rather him dead than have a son like that. And Remus heard the words in his head like it was yesterday. The snarl of Orion's lip and the way he had stepped into Remus as he spat the word sick at him. The white of his teeth in the dark and the smell of liquor on his breath. The downright wicked glint in his eyes. And it hadn't been the comment about them being sick or him blaming Remus. He had known how they felt about him from the get-go. It was the, "I'd rather him dead," that had caused Remus to act without thinking, his hand coming up and landing a punch square to Sirius's father's face. And it was like time had slowed. He'll never forget the way Orion's face whipped to the side and spit had gone fucking flying. He got in my face, and I don't think he had even finished the sentence before he was spitting blood on your driveway, Remus admitted with a half shrug into Sirius's neck. He wasn't proud, per se, but was proud that he had been there, just once, to stand up to him. He said that about you being better off dead, and I didn't even think. Remus sat up then, resting his chin on Sirius's chest and looking up at him. His eyes were wide, looking past Remus at the wall behind him. Square punch to the jaw, and then a second later, there was a moment where there was fucking disbelief in his eyes, and then I was on the driveway. Remus shook his head. I went to duck when I saw his fist coming up, but his ring, that fucking flashy-ass ring, caught when he landed the punch, and it fucking hurt. Remus hated admitting that, but it did, if he were being honest. It had hurt so much. Physically, it was awful, and the blood had begun to drip into his eye as soon as he looked up from the pavement. And then he looked at the ground, and, yeah, he was looking down at me. But, as I said, there was this disbelief in his eyes, like he couldn't believe someone had just done that to him. I laughed and told him that should have happened a long time ago. Someone should have done that a long fucking time ago. He looked up and felt the burn of his palms on the concrete. Fuck you. Remus spat on the pavement, his spit shining and mixing with the blood next to Orion's shoes. What? Sirius started, but Remus cut him off. I don't regret it. One bit. Not 1 ounce of me wouldn't go back and do it again right now. Over and over and over. Again and again. Because he got what he deserved. Remus spoke softly, but firmly. That day, and in the end. Sorry, but he did. It was silent between them, and Remus hated it. He felt the panic threatening to split him in two, because this was that moment. The moment he feared when sharing things where everything was up in the air and waiting to come back down. But then he looked up at Sirius, and there were fucking tears in his eyes. His eyes were glassy, and he had a frown on his face, and Remus couldn't stand it. Felt anger at Orion for creating the moment he was currently in. Wanted to fucking scream for Sirius because Remus couldn't stand the idea that he could ever be that upset. Ever. No, he said, sitting up and pulling Sirius up by the shoulder to lean in front of him. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Sirius sniffled, wiping his eye with his hand before shaking his head. No, I'm not upset about that. I get it. I'm so sorry. Why are you sorry? Remus asked. It wasn't you. Yeah, but that's my father. I mean, in a roundabout way, it kind of is my Don't say that, Remus said, voice stern as he took Sirius's head in his hands and shook it lightly. Please don't. I was terrified to say anything because I didn't want you to think that way. Please, Remus begged. It was not your fault. He came back a few days later with a bruise on his face. It was fucked up. He wouldn't tell any of us what happened. Sirius almost laughed. That was you. That was me, Remus nodded, eyeing him warily. I think I'll hate myself for the rest of my life a little more because of this, Sirius admitted quietly. But thank you for telling me. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. And thank you for defending me, Moons. I always did. Sirius reached up again, trailing his finger across the scar. I don't think it's ugly. I like it a lot less now. Honestly, I hate it, but I don't think it makes you ugly. You could never be ugly. He scoffed. I mean, quite handsome, actually. Did you know? Sirius murmured. You're not mad at me? Am I mad at you, deciding to try and fight my dad? No, I wish I had a long time ago. His thumb snagged on where the scar ran into Remus's lip. But as you said, he's dead. I can't do anything about it now, and I'm sure he fucking died miserable and alone and is rotting in hell. Sirius was quiet for another moment before sighing. You'll feel bad if I feel bad. I'm sorry, Remus said again, because he couldn't not. It was the truth. The last thing he wanted was for Sirius to regret something that had been seemingly inevitable. Stop saying that. I'm not upset with you. I'm upset with him, and I hate that he did that to you. Sirius sat up fully, actually seething a bit, but I'm high and still trying to think. But I'm not mad at you. Okay, Remus said softly, nodding. I'm sorry. Sirius sighed, shaking his head before bringing Remus's face closer and kissing his forehead, where the scar started. And that was that. Jamie and Lily were still out, and somehow, by God's good grace, nothing was weird after Remus had told Sirius that his father had kind of beat the shit out of him and scarred his face for life. Not for lack of anger or apologies on Sirius's part. His father being dead was hard enough. Sirius had said that himself, and he even told Remus, it was rather sweet really, that when he inevitably goes to hell, to which Remus had vehemently denied would happen, he would find his father and kill him all over again. It was endearing and very much a serious thing to say. And it had been followed by numerous kisses on his face, which Remus was not one to deny or turn down. Then it had turned into lying on the bed and smoking again, and sometimes Remus held the joint out to Sirius as he promised to take a tiny hit, which still resulted in coughing. Other times, Remus would press his mouth against Sirius, and he would inhale the smoke, and before pulling away, press their lips together, and Remus wondered if he could just smoke like that forever. No need for joints. Spliffs, throw them all out. And then they were in the living room, Sirius sitting on the couch as Remus fiddled with the radio to try and turn on some music again, because although the sound of the rain outside was peaceful, it was silent in the apartment, and silence led to thinking, and by the way Sirius was chewing on his bottom lip, Remus knew he was high and thinking. Never a good combination when it comes to bad shit. So Remus turned on the radio, messed with the stations until he found one, and walked over, holding his hand out to Sirius. He only looked up at Remus, eyes empty, before tentatively grabbing his hand and allowing Remus to pull him up. The end of the song had been playing and faded out, and Remus smiled softly as they heard the crackling of the beginning of Funkadelic starting up. Dance with me, he murmured, not giving Sirius a moment to object before he let go, only for a moment, to push the coffee table off to the side. He tested his socks on the rug. Good traction. And Sirius let out a weak laugh, reaching out and pulling Remus towards him before wrapping his arms around his neck. They only stood there, not really dancing, but more swaying slightly to the sound of Eddie Hazel playing the guitar. Remus rested his head on Sirius's, listening to the music, soaking up the feeling of Sirius in his arms. Still there, even after telling him, and it made Remus wonder how giving Sirius could be. If Remus could say that to him, and Sirius only nod in understanding, and then try to apologize. Maybe there was hope. He really fucking hoped there was. The sound of Hazel playing wove its way through the room, and Remus leaned them over, Sirius still clinging to him, and turned it up louder, letting it flood out every bad thought he had. He righted them and heard Sirius's laugh float through the high ceilings. His grip around Remus's neck was tight, and Sirius followed him, trusting him not to let him fall. He would never. Remus brought his arms around Sirius, threading them in the base of his hair, and Sirius's fingers ghosted across the back of Remus's shoulders, nails dragging over skin. It was touching and dancing and a constant. A moment for themselves, as if it always was, and Remus grinned to himself, something small and just for him. He looked down over the back of Sirius's head and saw his hands. A smattering of scars, a silver ring, and already chipped nail polish. The reverb rang out in that tiny apartment, and Remus sighed as he felt Sirius drag his fingertips over his skin, picking and twisting at a few strands of hair, an ever-present reminder of who was in Remus's arms, so very there. I know you said not to say I'm sorry, Sirius spoke softly into his neck, but I am sorry. Remus paused for a moment before nodding. It's okay. Time went by as they listened to nothing but the music, and Remus could feel Sirius's lips against his neck, heavy inhales and heavy exhales, pressing so tightly into Remus he thought he might choke. Sirius's mouth moved ever so softly, singing along to the guitar. He spun them in lazy circles, careful to avoid knocking into the couch. He'd tilt to the side every once in a while, giving him a reason to hold Sirius tighter. Remus's fingers played with the ends of Sirius's hair, messing and feeling it fall through his fingertips. Over and over, again and again, it felt like silk, everything wonderful in the world, and having something to call your own. They threw their weight around like it was nothing, ending up here and then there, wherever the other decided to take them. Sirius grinned against Remus's neck a few times after stepping on his foot, and Remus almost slipped once, sock catching on the rug, and it was clumsy, but them. Sirius gripped him tighter before speaking. Thank you. Remus bit his tongue, rolling his head along with the music and the ups and downs, and finally, he decided to answer because it felt like one of those moments in life where everything lined up more than usual and made it easier. Will you tell me what happened in New York? Sirius was silent, still swaying along with Remus as he turned them. The mix of the radio, along with the sound of rain outside, picking up now, made everything feel a bit surreal. Remus was high, yeah, but this was something else. It felt like if there were a time to ask, it would be then. The quality of the air taking on something forgiving once more. I just didn't have a good time in New York. He shook his head against Remus's chest. I'll tell you someday, I promise. And Remus nodded because that was something. That was simultaneously the same thing he had gotten before, but he felt it now, that Sirius would tell him someday. Don't worry, though. Please. Sirius cleared his throat. I did the best I could. I really tried. Put up a good fight I think you'd be proud of. What? I promise I'll tell you, just not right now. I'm happy right now. He paused. And I'm here, and you're here, and that stuff just can't matter right now. And Remus let it go. Easy as that. Well, it wasn't easy. Remus wanted more than anything to push, to know, because it was killing him. But he knew nothing good would come of that. He respected Sirius, loved him more than anything fathomable, and Remus knew he would be there, ready to listen when he wanted to talk, just as Sirius had been for him. And then, as soon as the song started, it stopped. He pulled back, taking Sirius's face in his hands before nodding, hesitating for a moment and kissing him on the forehead. The next song came on, and Remus smiled. It started small, just a quirk of the mouth, before turning into a big fucking grin only for Sirius. A smile to drown out bad times and rewrite good ones. A smile with so much love in it. Remus was surprised there was any left when he spoke. It was always extremes with Sirius, from painful moments to happy moments that hurt your fucking cheeks. Dance with me? We've been dancing. Sirius rolled his eyes. Remus only laughed before Sirius let go of his neck, allowing Remus to take his hand and move back before stepping in and pulling Sirius closer. He brought a hand up, holding Sirius's as he, Remus wasn't a dancer, okay? Started to do some strange iteration of a mix between square dancing and fucking two-stepping. Sirius laughed as he looked down at their feet, right before Remus let go of his waist, and he spun out before spinning back, pressing his back against Remus's chest. And it was as easy as that. Remus rested his head on Sirius's shoulder, taking a few steps back before switching feet and rocking them side to side. He spun them both around before pushing Sirius out and pulling him back in, hand going to his waist. Sirius's hair fell in his face, and he let out a huff. Mooney's a dancer? Remus tried to hide a grin. I have no idea what I'm doing. I think you're doing a fine job. Only for you. Remus shook his head, spinning Sirius again, and he heard him laugh as he threw his head back, shaking it. Only for me? And his voice carried, drowned out Mr. Seeger as he seemed to sing a song just for them. It was a question as much as it was a statement, like Sirius knew Remus was not one to partake in frivolous things in life, but he did, for him. Remus nodded thoughtfully, tightening his grip around Sirius's waist and bringing him close. He felt his ring press into his finger, dipping into Sirius's back as he spoke. Always. April 12th. Take your damn medicine, Lily said, giving Sirius a look. I know you still feel like shit a bit ago, so don't even try to be a tough guy right now. We're all going to this show. Sirius looked at Remus for help, like that would do anything, and he only shrugged. Sirius was silent for a moment before Remus pushed past him. Just take the damn stuff. The medicine was taken, and Lily had declared he was even worse than James when he was sick, which garnered her a tongue stuck out behind her back. Remus laughed, then blushed and tried to cover for James before Lily narrowed her eyes and hit him with a, "He stuck his tongue out at me, didn't he?" Remus was a pushover and nodded. James had smacked him upside the head, playfully, of course, but no less hard, and then lit them both a joint. It was a little past 5 that afternoon, after they had all spent the morning sleeping, switching between being half awake and falling back asleep as the rain pelted down outside. Everything was cozy, warm, and peaceful. It was slightly cold, so when Sirius came out, requesting Remus's sweater, he gave it to him, and then found something else to wear because he was going to wear it. But, of course, if Sirius wanted it, he would give it to him. They all stood outside. Thankfully, it had stopped raining, but was still chilly, and watched as James shuffled around for his keys before sighing and going back upstairs because he had forgotten them. The show started at 7, and since they had the tickets already and the drive was about an hour, James was confident they would get there in time, which was fine. Remus was high. He could close his eyes and probably imagine he was there anyway. Just play him some Fleetwood Mac in the car. They all settled into James's Vista Cruiser, which was gold. James had been insistent about the fact, even though it looked tan at best to Remus, and started to drive. Lily turned around, exclaiming before blowing them both a kiss, to which Sirius did a huge show of catching. He was feeling better, had insisted, but at the same time, Remus knew he was tired after being cooped up for so many days. He had fallen asleep the day before, early after they had danced, for Remus doesn't even know how long. Curled up on the couch when James and Lily came home, he eventually carried Sirius to the bed, and not soon after, Remus fell asleep too. Being in love was exhausting. So, very out of Sirius's character, he was only wearing the pants and Remus's sweater, which had made Remus smile despite trying to hide it and warranted a quirk of the brow from Sirius. There was hardly any traffic on the I-70. The windows were eventually rolled down, and the heat turned up, which Remus always thought was an underrated combination. Sirius was leaning on Remus's side, his eyes closed as he either slept, tried to sleep, or was asleep. Remus wasn't sure, but eventually shifted, so he was lying across the back, Sirius lying between his legs with his head on his chest, arms tucked into his sweater. Eventually, Lily lit a joint, passed it back to Remus, and he smoked that for a while after she told him to keep it. She had more. Fine by him. Sirius lifted up at one point, his nose twitching before narrowing his eyes at Remus and parting his lips. He held the joint to Sirius's mouth before he took a drag, pulling the sweater over his head and exhaling into it like some sort of mini hotbox. Remus chuckled. And everyone was quiet but excited. You could feel it in the air. And Lily put on their rumors tape because, "I'm just so excited. I can't wait. I love you guys." And then Sirius decided to wake up, apparently getting his second wind. "Turn it up," he mumbled before throwing himself across the seat, nearly on top of Remus, and taking the joint from him. "Gimme that." He quirked a brow and smirked at Remus before taking a long drag, his hands coming to the back of Remus's head and pushing their mouths together. More shotgunning. Oh no. And secondhand news faded out before Sirius paused. Leaning towards the front of the car, he and Lily made eye contact. "Sing?" "Sing," she nodded, a grin spreading across her face. "Gimme that too. Lily's a terrible singer," James cursed and snatched the joint out of Sirius's hand as the song started, and Sirius leaned his elbow on the center console, staring into Lily's eyes as they began to sing. It was not the best, but it was something. A deep breath from both of them. Remus laughed, and Sirius turned to look at him, another one of those looks behind his eyes. He once again almost lunged into Remus's lap, apparently feeling much better if he was able to move like that, and took Remus's face in his hands as he sang. Lily picked up from the front of the car, leaning her head on James's shoulder and looking up at him. Sirius looked at him pointedly, and Remus rolled his eyes before singing. And that was all Lily and Sirius, harmonizing into something almost acceptable. And then there was a moment after Remus sang where Sirius's eyes lit up, like he was fucking delighted that Remus was playing along, and it tugged at those pesky heartstrings so damn hard. Yanked at them, really. It was Sirius looking at Remus like, please sing with me. You danced with me yesterday. Now sing with me. And because Remus looked at James driving as he ashed out his joint, and he saw him take a deep breath as Lily stuck her hand out the window, leaning her head on the sill, and her hair was blowing in the wind. Sirius's hair was whipping around his face, and he was pushing it back every few moments, showing off that fucking smile. And so Remus shrugged and sang along with the chorus because why the fuck not? Life had been pretty good recently. He laughed between the verses, and Lily looked back, smiling as Remus grabbed Sirius's head in his hands, swaying them both to the music, singing to him. Sirius's hands were in the air before he leaned forward, letting them hang out the window behind Remus and press their forwards together. There was no one else he would ever sing for. And it was like Remus fell in love all over again at that moment. They pulled up to the venue about 30 minutes before the show started, and James had grumbled about having wanted to make better time, but tickets were shown, and they entered with no issue. It was packed, and James and Remus stopped while Lily and Sirius smoked a cigarette and bought a ridiculous amount of beer to stick in Lily's purse so they wouldn't have to leave during the show. That should be enough, Remus shrugged, because it was more than enough. James only looked at their stash warily. If not, we can always smoke. They found their way back to where they had left Sirius and Lily, and despite Sirius feeling better, he was a bit quieter than usual, which really just meant when he yelled about things, it was at a much lower volume. They had standing seats, and as they passed the entrance to show their tickets again, Remus turned, noticing 2 flyers on the wall before snatching them up and stuffing them in his pocket. They found a space near the back of the grassy area to set up. Lily had brought a blanket and laid it down before dumping their beer out. Sirius fell onto it, stretching out as the sound of checks rang out through the arena. "Babe!" James threw his hands out. "You just shook them all up." Lily, who preferred to smoke, did not seem to care one bit and only shrugged, glancing at Remus and smiling that smile. Sirius tugged him down, and Remus landed half on his legs, half laying on top of him, which seemed fine by Sirius as he leaned over, nestling his face into the back of Remus's neck. He pulled back slightly, smiling at him. "I'm excited," he whispered. "Me too," Remus nodded, pushing a lock of Sirius's hair behind his ear. "Do you want to get, really high?" "I thought you'd never ask." And because Remus, the lovesick fool, would always do whatever Sirius wanted, he lifted up and fake bowed before digging in his pants for his pack of cigarettes. They resettled as the band came on stage, and Remus rested his hands, supporting them both as Sirius leaned back against his chest. The music started as Sirius lit the joint, inhaling before reaching back, blindly holding it out to Remus, who took it between his lips and took a drag. And then it was an entire night of being stoned as ever-loving God himself, and Sirius's back warm, pressed against Remus's chest. The crowd went wild, rightfully so, because, yeah, that was Stevie Nicks, and maybe the only other person in the world as beautiful as Sirius. It was a toss-up, and Remus would say every day until his last breath that Sirius was the prettiest, and he meant that, but also Stevie looked a bit heavenly up there. Sirius turned around, looking at Remus for a moment. He didn't say anything, no narrowing of the eyes or squinting, but his eyes were open and full of something. Remus stared back. Eventually, a small smile cracked, which seemed to appease Sirius because he turned around, offering the joint to Remus again. Remus looked over at Jamie and Lily, in their own little world as he held her, swaying along with the music, but she looked away from the stage for a moment, winking at Remus. He couldn't help but smile. He was about halfway to being high as God himself, before resting his chin on Sirius's shoulder. And because he loved Sirius as much as he did, and longed to make him happy always, Remus sang. He did, and it was shit and paled in comparison to what everyone was hearing around them, but he saw a ghost of a smile cross over Sirius's face as he leaned into Remus's head, and that was enough. Remus wrapped his arms around Sirius's middle, taking the joint between his lips and mumbling through it. And they stayed like that, in their own little world, much as they had been at the other shows. And there was much less punching, as there had been at Black Sabbath, and Remus supposed a lot had changed since then, from where he was then and where he was now. Now he was holding Sirius, and Sirius was smiling at him and leaning into him, and they were high, and yes, Remus was still freaking out a bit, but he had settled into it. Distinguished what freaking out came from anxiety, and what freaking out was because of how much he loved the man pressed against him. One was bad, and the other was bad too, but in a different way. Made him feel fucking high, which he was, so maybe that didn't hold a lot of validity, but he could tell the difference. The song faded out, and the crowd went wild, and Lily and James got up to dance as the next one came on, and it was so fucking sweet, Remus felt like his heart was going to jump out of his chest. Go Your Own Way played, and it was a sea of people, everyone dancing and moving, and it was odd, him and Sirius being so quiet. Sirius was still leaning against him, bundled in his sweater and swaying his head to the music every few moments, but compared to the rest of the crowd, they were motionless, and it was nothing in comparison. Being around so many people outwardly thrilled at life, and that had been them the time before, at Zeppelin, and now they were sitting, but if Remus were honest, he was happier now than he had been then, and that's just a monumental thought, wasn't it? The song ended, and the band took a moment. Sirius turned around then, not saying anything, but pushing Remus to the side until he was sitting facing Lily and James. Then he just sat in Remus's lap, all weird-like. His legs were digging into Remus's thighs, but Sirius sat curled up in his lap, and Remus reached up and moved his chin to rest on top of his head as they turned to the stage again and watched. Sirius leaned over, grabbing one of the beers before trying to open it. Remus, for once, grabbed it and popped the tab carefully before handing it to Sirius, who smiled to himself. Remus saw it out of the corner of his eye and planted a kiss on the base of his neck before taking a sip. It was cold out, and Remus had foregone a jacket, and he was high enough. He would do it sober now, too, 'cause he felt like he could, to weave his hands under Sirius's sweater, and was surprised to see he hadn't worn a shirt. Sirius's bare skin against his sweater, a nice thought indeed, and Remus nodded to himself as he planted his palms flush against Sirius's skin. It was warm and soft, and the curve of his back just fit so perfectly in Remus's palms. "You feeling me up at a Fleetwood Mac show, Moons?" Sirius laughed, speaking softly near his ear. "Bold, but I'll take it." "Hands are cold." Remus shook his head, huffing out a laugh before pressing the back of his hands against Sirius's waist. "Sure." He squeezed, and Sirius pushed his head against Remus closer. The song played through, and Remus's fingers only twitched slightly. He resisted the urge to run them over his skin, over the moon tattoos he knew were back there, because this was enough. And maybe, sure, he was trying to feel him up at a Fleetwood Mac concert, but could you blame him? Remus wouldn't blame himself, not one bit. Lily came over, lying down in front of them. "Love you guys. James went to go piss." "All the beers." Remus shook his head, glancing over and noticing he had knocked through about half of them. Lily grinned before digging in her bag, bringing out a spliff and lighting it. She held it out to Sirius first, who took a hit, and then Remus, because his hands were otherwise preoccupied, now moving to the front of the sweater where Sirius was playing with his fingers. Soft touches, running his fingers over Remus's knuckles, bending his fingers back and forward and turning them over in his hands. It made Remus grin and poke at his stomach before he gasped as Sirius bent a finger back too far and shot him a grin. "Don't be mean." Remus narrowed his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." And Remus would give it to him. Sirius played the innocent part well, but not well enough. So Remus knocked his forehead against his as the next song started, and Lily gasped, looking at Sirius. "Please dance with me." Sirius's hand stopped fiddling with his for a moment before he laughed and nodded. "All right, Evans, only because I love you." And Remus smiled because, despite the fact that now his hands were even colder after being so warm and his fingers had lost the touch of Sirius's, he knew Sirius was dancing with her only because he loved her. And if Remus were a dancer, he would have gone up there too and danced alongside them. But he was not, only for Sirius. "You Make Loving Fun" started up, and you could hardly hear the first verse over the screams of the crowd. Thousands of people began to swarm at once, standing and grabbing someone, and everyone was dancing and moving and living life. And maybe at one point, Remus would have been sad, not to have someone to dance with. But then he watched as Sirius took Lily's hand, spun her around much like he had the day before, and it didn't really matter. Remus leaned back and watched Sirius smile. That's it. He didn't really care about the dancing, or Lily even at that moment, although he loved her. He was focused on the grin across Sirius's face and the laugh he could just make out over the music. Sirius shot Remus a glance, winking as he spun Lily out and then back in like Remus had him the day before. And Remus laughed, freely, and it was like music to his own ears, resounded in his head like a moment in itself, a song in itself. And as he said, he was no poet, but the title could maybe have been Someone Who Is Finally Happy, Content. Lindsey Buckingham took them through the guitar solo, which was increasingly more impressive live, and Sirius stopped, staring at the stage for a moment in awe, which was as endearing as it got, Remus thought. I mean, it was really something. They had played well, but it was coming to the end of the night, and it seemed like everyone was just fucking there, in whatever sense they wanted to be. Remus watched as Sirius brought Lily's face close to his, whispering in her ear for a moment before she looked over at Remus and winked again before the chorus ended. And then Remus, quite honestly, was attacked by Sirius. Like, toppled over, and then Sirius's lips were on Remus's. And holy hell, Remus chuckled against his lips and grinned. Lily let out a whoop behind them, and Sirius rolled them over, and Remus just went with it, his head spinning. Drowning, really. His head, and he was drowning in the taste of Sirius and kissing him, and he gasped finally, Remus's brain catching up to him as he heard James finally come back and whoop as well, and everyone was just there. He was kissing Sirius in front of thousands of people, and they probably weren't even watching, which is why Remus brought his hand up, threading it through the hair at the base of Sirius's neck and pulling his head back, slipping his tongue into his mouth. He nodded to himself, or Sirius, or whoever was granting him this moment. Hell, even Stevie, who once again, as Plant had, was seeming to just sort through the mush that his mind was currently and articulate his thoughts for him, because he sure as hell couldn't. He was high and kissing Sirius, and fuck yeah, this is all Remus wanted to do. Sirius finally came up for air, bringing his arm around Remus's back and pressing him closer, and Remus, he couldn't help it, brought his knee up between Sirius's legs, and it was worth it because Sirius gasped. His mouth opened for Remus again, and he ran his tongue over those fucking canines he loved so much, breaking off into a laugh. And Sirius was also laughing into his mouth, just a breath, and Remus soaked it up like a fucking sponge because nothing in the world beat Sirius's laugh. High and loose and free and everything Remus was not, but he thought maybe if he could swallow it whole for the rest of his life, just like this, he could feel the same. He did at that moment, and it was because of Sirius. Sirius swiped his tongue across Remus's lip before pushing his chin up with the top of his head, his lips finding the perfect spot behind his ear, and Remus moaned, catching his breath enough to speak. Now, who's feeling up who? I'm feeling you up. Sirius sank onto his knee, and Remus felt the tilt of his hips. Shut up, I'm busy. He looked up, his head lolling to the side as Sirius bit down, dragging his teeth over his neck before sucking again, thoroughly, and Remus knew he would have a gnarly hickey the next day, and it was fine, please, by all means, but it only seemed fair to give what he took. Remus pulled back as the song ended, pushing Sirius's head to the side before dragging his teeth over the Bite Here tattoo on his neck. Remus bit down a moment later and heard Sirius groan. It was perfect, really, like Sirius hadn't known, but he had gotten the tattoo for that exact moment. And once Remus felt he was sufficiently hickeyed, he pulled back and looked at Sirius. And then, Remus would maybe take back his statement from earlier about falling in love all over again, because he thinks maybe it happened that moment instead. Or it was happening for the third time, which seemed absurd and more than one man could take, but it was happening either way. The band was yelling their thank yous, and the crowd was roaring around them. James and Lily were wherever they were. Remus had no idea, only knew where Sirius was, which was under him. And then they went into the encore, and Remus felt a bit weak at the knees, even though he was lying down when the first notes of the guitars ran throughout the air. I'm leading, was all Sirius said as he pushed Remus off of him, stood quickly, and took his hand, dragging them to where he and Lily had been dancing before. Remus was a bit dazed, all the blood rushing to his head as he was pulled up, and his lips were swollen, and upon inspection, Sirius's were too, and his face was flushed, and Remus grinned like an idiot because, yeah, he had done that. And then Sirius was pulling him close, one hand resting on Remus's shoulder and the other threading their fingers together, and it was like if Remus could close his eyes, they were back in his childhood home. On that Friday night, that had been the first day of spring break, their 8th grade year.
Need someone's hand to lead me through the night. I need someone's arms to hold and squeeze me tight.
And Sirius tilted them side to side like he had done that same night, his eyes closed and his head against Remus's chest like he remembered the exact same thing. Vividly, it flashed through Remus's mind when he closed his eyes, but he didn't want to think about that memory. Much preferred to look down and watch Sirius's smile as he danced with him, now.
Now when the night begins, I'm at an end, because I need your love so bad.
Remus stepped back, and Sirius followed. Always followed, but led as well. Like it was all a dance, and they had been doing it for years. For so long, it was a push and pull, and a give and take, and at that moment, Sirius went where Remus did, despite supposing to be leading, and Remus followed Sirius as he stepped them back.
I need some lips to feel next to mine. I need someone to stand up and tell me when I'm lying.
And he fell for Sirius all over again, for the 3rd time, he supposed. Remus felt Sirius rub his face into the fabric of his shirt and felt what he thought were tears soaking through the material. He laid his head on top of Sirius's, fought back tears as well, and allowed himself a bit. To reflect and mourn, to grieve and thank, to thank the heavens for the pretty moments and the nice things in life, the things he hadn't thought he deserved. Remus sighed and thought maybe it wasn't the 3rd time, and instead, the problem was that he fell for Sirius every single day. Every single moment he was able to glance over and look at his smile or hear his laugh, but even that wasn't right. Remus fell even when Sirius hadn't been there, even harder those times, and scraped his knees, and it had been rough, but he had been tumbling for a long, long time. Sirius's voice carried through his head about how he was falling and hoping he landed somewhere nice more than anything. He didn't want to drag Remus down with him, though. And Remus only grinned, pressing a chaste kiss against his hair, because at that moment he thought maybe they had both been falling, both hoping to land somewhere nice, and perhaps they were just waiting for one of them to reach out to the other and catch. And if that was the case, then they would have to fall together and end up somewhere nice together as well.
Now when the lights are low and it's time to go, that's when I need your love so bad.